Hey guys, do not forget to leave that like and subscribe to the channel. I am not a robot, and comment, I love magic. The anime begins by showing us the young Marie. She is very emotional upon seeing that her parents are already returning home. As they approach, she becomes deeply moved when she sees how her mother carries her younger brother, named Shin, in her arms. When he awakens, she gives him a kiss on the cheek and mentions that she is his older sister. After 3 years, they are playing in the courtyard. At that moment, their father arrives, and Marie runs to receive him. Next, Shin arrives to greet his father, and he remarks that he is as mature as always. At that moment, Marie thinks that it is true. Her brother Shin has always been very mature, and she remembers how he always helps their mother, and has never even wet the bed. And on some occasions, she has already seen him making a very serious face, just like that of an adult. But she knows the truth very well, since she noticed how sometimes her brother plays hide and seek, and he begins to imagine things as if he could use magic, feeling that this is very cute of him. Already at night, while everyone is having dinner, Shin asks his father if monsters exist. His father answers yes, and for that reason they cannot leave the property, because monsters attack people, and could put their lives at risk. Therefore, if they encounter one, they must flee immediately. Shin asks if spirits or fairies also exist, and his father answers yes. He has never heard about spirits, but he has heard about fairies, but they are very rare, and it is very unlikely to encounter one. Shin becomes very excited, and asks if there is also magic like fire, water, wind, or light magic. But to this question, his father answers that such a thing does not exist, or at least he has never even heard the word magic. His father says that even though there are many things he does not know, he considers himself well educated, and can guarantee that the word magic is not known by the common people. He has never heard of anything like that, so he becomes very curious, and asks where his son learned about monsters, fairies, and this so-called magic. His worried sister asks if he is okay, but Shin becomes a little depressed. Even so, he says that he is fine. However, since that day, Shin never spoke the word magic again. 3 years later, while he is reading a book, he asks Marie why she exerts herself so much in training. She answers that it is because she is the older sister, and she is training so that if something happens, such as if a monster appears, it would be best to know how to defend oneself. Furthermore, she is very good at it, and she does it to be able to protect him, because as an older sister, if she is not strong, she will not be able to protect him, and if something happens to him, it would be terrible. In the end, she is not very intelligent, and makes physical exercise her specialty. Shin observes his sister with surprise, because she has always trained for his sake. And sometime later we see how Marie is still training, and her friend named Rose comments that she is impressive, and does not get tired of always doing the same thing every single day. Next, she asks if Shin continues as always, locked away every day reading. At that moment, Marie thinks that since that day, Shin never touched upon the subject again. But she is certain that the reason why her brother Shin is so obsessed with studying is to find magic. Suddenly, the lake begins to illuminate, and the girls are left somewhat without understanding. And the following day Marie takes Shin to the same lake. But he becomes very nervous, because most likely their sister, or rather, their parents will scold them for having gone so far from home. Marie comments that perhaps she will get scolded, but it will be worth it, or at least that is what she hopes. Suddenly, from the lake, a lot of glowing particles begin to appear, and Marie comments to Shin that before nightfall these spheres of light appear. Shin asks if his father and the others know about this, and she answers yes, because when she discovered it, she took her father there. However, curiously, he was unable to see them, which is why she was not very sure if he would be able to see them either. Shin thinks that perhaps adults are incapable of seeing them, but Marie answers that even some children cannot, as it appears each person sees them in a different way. They saw them as if they were blinking, but other people see them as a continuous light. She thinks this is very strange, but it resembles that magic he had mentioned some time ago. He is very surprised to see that she still remembers that, and she answers that even though she does not have a good memory, she managed to remember because it concerns her brother. Furthermore, since that day he had been very discouraged. Shin becomes deeply moved and apologizes for having worried her, and she answers that he does not need to worry, and that it is better for them to return home. She hopes that now he is a little more cheerful. The next day, while they are having lunch, his parents become very confused, because they are choking on their food, and after that they head out again towards the lake, where his sister scolds him. Why does her brother have a pathetic physique? He recognizes that he needs to exercise, but since there is still a long time before nightfall, he wanted to better investigate the lake and discover where the spheres of light come from, because perhaps some creature that lives in it is releasing them. Marie asks what they should do first, and Shin says that the first step would be to fill 3 buckets, one with stones, another with sand, and the third with marine plants and fish. Later on he manages to fill everything, but the fish are still missing. Shin thanks his sister for accompanying him through all of this, and she answers that if this interests him, then she will accompany him. Furthermore, if magic really existed, she would like to see it. At that moment, a fish finally takes the bait, and Marie manages to catch it. While they observe, the fish in the bucket are interrupted by Rose. Marie introduces her brother, and Rose introduces herself as a lonely flower that blooms in that desolate village. Marie warns her brother that she is just an ordinary peasant girl and only likes to make herself seem interesting. Rose complains and asks what they are doing in that place. Marie responds by asking if she does not see what they are fishing for. Rose says she already knows, but asks why in that lake. She reveals that her brother already knows, and Rose is quite surprised to see that Shin can also see the particles, while Shin is quite impressed when he discovers that Rose spends all her time observing them. But she asks him to step back a little. At nightfall, the particles begin to sprout in the lake again, but the buckets are not glowing at all. Shin remarks to his sister that he tried to replicate the conditions of the lake, but there must be other creatures in it besides the trout, which is why it will be very difficult to gather them all. To discover the truth, he decides to enter the lake, but Marie cannot allow only her brother to risk himself, so she takes off her clothes and enters with him. While they explore, Shin touches one of the spheres and comments that it is quite pleasant and a little warm. Afterward, he tries to look underwater, but he cannot see anything because it is too dark. However, he discovers that the spheres are released by some marine creature, or perhaps even by the fish, but he doubts very much that they are plants, because the location from which they come is varying too much. Even so, he still does not know what kind of animal is causing this, but later they leave the lake, and Shin takes the opportunity to thank his sister for everything she is doing for him. At that moment, Rose becomes very excited, because she managed to capture a female trout, and Marie comments that it is very easy to fish for the males, but the females are usually in very deep places. Upon placing the female trout in the bucket along with the male trout, more particles begin to appear, causing Shin to discover that the particles are part of courtship, meaning that the spheres are part of the courtship ritual of the trout. Marie asks curiously what the courtship ritual means, and Rose explains that it is when mommy and daddy want to get married. She says that her brother and she do not need that because they are already family. Shin says no, because they are siblings they cannot get married. Marie becomes confused and asks if he does not like her, and he answers that he does like her, but that they cannot get married. The next day, Marie mentions to Shin that their mother got angry with her, because when she said she wanted to marry her brother, she answered the same thing he did. She does not understand what is wrong with wanting to be forever with her brother, and he answers that he also wants to be with her, but that it is not necessary to get married for that. But she comments that marriage is something special, and that if they do not get married, someday they will marry someone else, and then they will no longer be together. Shin answers that in that case he will not marry anyone, and he will stay forever by her side, and that if he wants an heir, he could adopt. Shin says it is not that simple, but he also wants to stay with her and swears that it will be that way. While hugging his sister, he says that everything is fine, and that she does not need to worry. But while they embrace, he begins to glow strangely. Shin thinks that perhaps that is magical energy, and assumes that by being exposed to the courtship ritual of the trout for so long, unconsciously the energy intensified inside him, and thinks that by saying he would not marry anyone for her sake, he was confessing his love. At that moment, his sister cannot bear the embarrassment and runs out of the room. Meanwhile, Shin thinks that magical energy does exist, and that perhaps magic does not exist in that world because they have not yet developed magical techniques, and he becomes excited believing that his story is only beginning, for he will be the one to create magic in this world in which he reincarnated. After that, we learn a little more about him, who unfortunately is a 30-year-old virgin man, who becomes very excited because now that he has finally reached 30 years old as a virgin, supposedly he will become a sorcerer, but he becomes very frustrated when trying to cast a fireball. He has a complete collection of magic books, and begins trying to cast any kind of spell, but clearly he cannot do anything. He becomes frustrated and throws himself onto the floor. and grabs a notebook trying to perform a summoning, but it did not work out. He becomes very depressed and gives up, and understands that in that world magic does not exist, and when he tries to go to sleep to go to work the next day, he ends up dying of cardiac arrest. His life flashes before his eyes, and he thinks that the world is full of information, and that if you need something, you just have to look for it. In his boring life, his heart filled with excitement just by thinking about things he did not know. He believed that if he really reached 30 years old as a virgin, he would become a sorcerer, but deep down he knew that this was just a sham. But we see that this 30-year-old virgin became Shin. Unfortunately, upon reincarnating in this new world, magic does not exist either. No matter how much he investigated and searched, he found nothing. He almost lost his new reason for living until that happened. Returning to the present, upon trying to cast a fireball, nothing happens either. But he does not intend to give up. First, he needs to start with the basics. He is still not sure if magic really exists. At this moment he found something that resembles it. At that moment, his sister enters the room and Shin asks her to at least knock on the door. Marie asks if he was doing something improper. He even thinks not, but the time will come when yes. Changing the subject, he says that she arrived at the right time and asks her to sit by his side. Upon doing so, he begins to say that he loves her very much. Marie becomes embarrassed, but at that moment a magical aura begins to emerge from him, and he understands that confessing activates his magical power. At the same time, he wonders if he will have to confess every single time he wants to activate it. While he is lost in these thoughts, his sister asks if he is just playing with her. Shin becomes quite startled and says that the previous time he managed to activate his powers with that courtship thing. Marie wonders if he was lying and Shin answers that what he said is true. Marie becomes embarrassed again. While Shin thinks that she is very easy to convince, she asks if he discovered anything, and he answers that so far he can only activate his powers by confessing. But he does not think that emitting energy is limited only to that. He warns that he wants to try something and his sister becomes nervous thinking he is going to confess again. But Shin asks her to calm down. He thinks that each time he confesses his feelings, he becomes conscious of them, meaning that he feels an intense emotion. So he tries to concentrate on other emotions, such as amusement, anticipation, excitement, and joy. When he does that, he manages to activate his aura. His sister is quite surprised and Shin says that it only glowed a little. But he is aware that even with it being just that, it is a phenomenon that defies all logic, which is why he has just proven that magic really exists. He explains that this phenomenon resembles what an electric eel could be. They possess a capability called electroreception, which allows them to perceive electric fields. And since their bodies possess a special electric organ, they can use it to generate electricity. He thinks that perhaps the bodies of the people of that world have something similar, which allows them to perceive and generate magical power, which is why he decides to call this state magical charge. She becomes a little startled upon seeing Shin's expression, but she is happy because her brother is happy. Sometime later, Shin learned to control the state of charge. In that month, he discovered that to enter this state, he needs a very intense emotion. But maintaining this emotion is extremely difficult, and he can only remain in this state for a limited time. Since when he releases all the magical power he possesses, he becomes exhausted suddenly. But if he manages to emit his magical power to the maximum, the next state of charge only increases. Furthermore, he discovers that this state can only be seen by people with magical aptitude, and those who do not have it cannot see it. And his greatest discovery, and also his greatest problem, is that he cannot launch spheres of light. He feels quite frustrated, but thinks that perhaps his amount of magical power only allows him to make his body glow. He becomes quite depressed when thinking that he has less magic than a fish, but he does not intend to give up, even while feeling blocked without managing to advance. Upon remembering that the trout managed to make their own bodies glow and also expel spheres of light, he has an idea and tries to send his magical power to one of his arms. But this proves to be more difficult than he imagined. For while he needs to maintain a happy emotion, he also needs to concentrate on his right arm, which is a logical thought, making it very complicated to unite the two opposing thoughts. Therefore, he decides to invert it and tries to get emotional while concentrating power in his right hand, and manages to make it glow as well. But he gets too excited and ends up hitting the wall, feeling a very intense pain. In the beginning, he thought he could achieve some destructive power, but he does not let himself be discouraged. On the contrary, he becomes very excited, because at least he managed to emit a very strong light, and he names this state as mana accumulation. He continues to practice the state of charge to increase his magical capacity. Some time later, the moment arrives to practice with his father, who from that day on begins to teach swordsmanship to Shin and also to Rose. But Shin is not very interested and tells his father that he does not want to fight anyone, so it makes no sense to learn swordsmanship. But his father corrects him, saying that the sword will not be used only against people, reminding him that outside the village there are many monsters. Even so, Shin only wants to continue practicing the accumulation of magic. But later he is very tired, while his father praises Rose because she is very good at swordsmanship, and if she continues training with dedication, she will be an excellent swordsman. Then it is his daughter's turn, who is determined to show her father everything she has improved. Shin observes that his sister is very fast and is quite impressed by it, but she is defeated by her father with great ease. He congratulates her, but comments that her movements are too wide. But if she keeps striving, in a few years she will undoubtedly be a great swordsman. Sometime later, Shin returns to his room to continue practicing magic. Before, he would reach his limit after few attempts at maintaining his accumulation, but now he manages to do it about 20 times. However, he can no longer increase this number as much as in the beginning, thinking that he should stop and reconsider his methods. At that moment, his father knocks on the door, and upon entering the room asks if Shin wants to accompany him to the city. He becomes very excited and goes with his father. Upon arriving at the city, the father tells the family not to stray away, because they might get lost, making Shin lament. But he understands that now he is just a child and cannot go everywhere alone. Still, he intends to note down all the interesting places, so that when he is older he can investigate on his own. Thus, they spend the whole day shopping. Upon arriving at the blacksmith shop, the blacksmith welcomes their father, and we discover that his name is Gawain. The blacksmith Gracio asks if he came to pick up the order, warning that it is already ready, since after all, it is for his daughter. He takes the opportunity to introduce himself and is surprised to see that the children are very polite, commenting that they do not look like Gawain's children. He asks if he wants to get beaten, and to avoid the confusion, Gracio ends up stepping back right away. Next, he hands the sword to Marie, who becomes very excited with her new weapon. On the way back home, the sister feels very bad, because they did not give anything to Shin. But he answers that she does not need to worry, since it is her birthday. At that moment, Shin notices a child keeping a creature caged, and upon asking his father what shop that is, his father answers in a very serious manner that he does not need to know. Shin apologizes, saying it was just curiosity, but upon looking back, he is sure that the sign of the shop said fairy sale. Sometime later, on a very rainy afternoon, we see a villager trying to carry firewood to his village, but he encounters someone running in desperation, who trips and begins to say in panic that everyone was killed and that the goblins are approaching. Meanwhile, Shin is practicing magic and manages to maintain the light in his hand for 10 seconds. Even so, he is still not totally satisfied, since he can only produce magic that glows and generates heat. But he is already getting used to it. Marie says that she likes his magic, but he begins to drift off into the subject, and thinks that there is something very strange in that world, since fairies and monsters exist. And in that place, fairies are considered as another type of animal, and including, there are people who hunt them to sell. He can understand his father, who simply does not like the idea of people existing who hunt beings with humanoid form, just to sell them afterward. At that moment, his thoughts are interrupted by Marie, who asks him to pay attention. At that instant, they hear a noise, and upon going downstairs to see what is happening, his father reveals that goblins have appeared. Shin becomes excited to hear this, and his father comments that they need to eliminate them as soon as possible, because leaving them loose will be very dangerous. However, Shin only thinks that if he investigates the goblins, perhaps he can discover much more about magic. He does not know very well what to do, but at that moment he notices that the people around are very tense, which makes him wonder why, since goblins are supposedly the weakest enemies. His father warns his wife that he is going to take all the women, elderly, and children of the village to their house, so that they remain safe, while the men go hunt the goblin. At that moment, Marie holds her brother's hand and tells him not to worry, because their father will handle everything, and she also thinks about protecting him. Shin notices that his sister is trembling. After that, his father and the villagers prepare to leave, but Shin interrupts him and asks if the goblins have enough strength and intelligence to go up to the second floor. His father answers no, and that since the outer wall is smooth, they will not be able to climb it. Upon hearing this, Shin suggests locking themselves on the second floor and blocking the doors and windows of the first, because that way they would be much safer. His father thinks it is a good idea, and before leaving, says he will give a signal so they can come down when everything is finished. A few hours later, when the house is already protected, a goblin enters the grounds and begins to attack the main door. The women and children inside become terrified upon hearing it, but suddenly the sound stops, and the noise of a window being broken terrorizes everyone even more. The goblin enters the house as if the house were his. Upon reaching the second floor, Shin warns that everyone needs to make silence. But at that moment a clap of thunder startles the girls, making them scream, and the goblin begins to attack the door. Upon breaking it, he enters the room, and the mother of the children places herself in front of him, begging not to be killed. The goblin just laughs at her face with a macabre laugh. The mother ends up falling from fear, while Shin notices that the goblin possesses full consciousness, and he knows he is the strongest one there. Marie fills herself with courage and draws her sword, but the goblin disarms her with a single blow. She remains completely in shock, while the goblin is only getting closer. Before he can attack, the mother intervenes and receives the blow. Everyone in the room becomes terrorized, while Shin, paralyzed, wonders what he should do. He does not think much and goes after the goblin, and notices that he is full of magical energy, so he decides to use his mana accumulation, holding his arm and beginning to concentrate a large amount of energy. Those who do not have affinity with magic cannot see anything, but Marie and Rose can see what Shin is achieving. The goblin is very confident, but suddenly he begins to feel the burns caused by Shin. He throws him against the wall, but Shin decides to stand his ground and attacks the goblin again, accumulating magic on his head and managing to defeat him by burning his skull. Even while being in shock and trembling, he observes how everyone around looks at him with terror, wondering why they look at him as if he were a monster. At that moment, Rose holds his hand and thanks him for having saved her. However, upon seeing his mother, she is in a very serious state. The storm only worsens, and Rose pulls Marie so that Shin can see what he can do. He thinks that the first thing to do is to stop the bleeding, but he cannot treat her on the floor. By luck, the other villagers appear and ask what happened, and when she is already in bed, he asks if anyone there knows medicine. However, nobody there knows, which he already expected because the village is very small. He remembers how they treated wounds in his old world, and asks if there is any good seamstress among them. A woman presents herself, and Shin asks her to go to his mother's room to fetch sewing tools in addition to strong alcohol and clean cloths. He also orders them to take the body of the goblin to the hallway. Everyone obeys, and at that moment, the villager and the boy from before approach to thank him. A while later, when they already have all the materials prepared, Shin asks the girl's name, and she introduces herself as Leah. Next, he tears his mother's dress and is relieved to see that the wound is not so deep. However, he becomes worried, because if the goblin's claws have poison, that could be the worst possible situation. Even so, he avoids thinking about that, and warns Leah that now she must sew the wound. She refuses, saying she does not have the courage to harm the body of the lady of these lands, but Shin answers that if they do not suture it, the wound will remain open, and she will be in danger. The girl still hesitates, and he says that it is necessary to hurt to save, because otherwise, she will go to the ice sky, and he begs her to help his mother. Leah looks at the children and decides to do it. After a rigorous suturing procedure, they manage to stabilize the mother. Marie embraces him crying. At that moment, the men of the village arrive, and we discover that they reached all the way to the village of the goblins, where they defeated 2 of them, but entered into panic upon seeing that there were more footprints. Realizing that there were not just 2 goblins, so they returned quickly to the village, and by luck, nobody died in the combat. The next day, the doctor goes to treat their mother, and comments that the wound was very well sewed, and asks if there was anyone in the village who knew medicine. Gawain becomes a little nervous and answers yes, and after that the doctor leaves. Marie, feeling guilty, apologizes to her mother, but she says that it is exactly the opposite. She was a very brave child, and tried to protect everyone, so she should be proud of that. Later, Gawain tells Shin that he has already learned through the villagers everything that happened, and that everything matches what he had been told. So he is a little intrigued, and asks how his son knew what to do to treat his mother. Shin becomes quite nervous, and thinks that he cannot reveal that he is 30 years old in his past life, so he simply answers that he does not know how to explain. This makes his father ask another question, wanting to know how he defeated that goblin, and why it had burns all over its body. Again, Shin becomes quite nervous and does not know what to answer. But suddenly the father asks if he used magic. Shin is caught by surprise and asks how he knew, and Gawain says that he has always been a very rational boy, so much so that he does not even seem like a child. However, there was one time that he said something that left him quite intrigued. He does not know if he believes in magic, but at least he wants to believe in his children. Marie comments that her brother is amazing, and that he has been exerting himself a lot researching about magic. But this makes the father become irritated, because he never imagined he would go so far, and orders him not to reveal anything about this, because if this spreads, terrible things could happen, such as being persecuted for his abilities, since there are things in that world that are not accepted, which is why he commands Shin to stop investigating magic. Marie interrupts, saying that her brother worked hard, and that thanks to that their mother is still alive. But the father responds that he cannot allow something so dangerous, since even the power to kill goblins and monsters is something risky. Even so, Shin is determined, and says that he will continue investigating magic. The father becomes even more irritated, and asks why he does not want to obey, and Shin answers that he understands what he feels, but if he stops investigating magic, he will be very unhappy. To the father, it might be something very dangerous, but to him it has always been his dream. The father says that this is just a child's attachment, which will pass when he grows up, but Shin responds that this will never change, and if his presence in that house is getting in the way or causing problems, then he can even be disowned, but he will not change his mind. Faced with this, the father realizes that Shin is completely resolved, and has no other option but to accept. However, from that moment on, he says that he will inform him about all his advances, and that if he begins to do something too dangerous, he will end up stopping him. Shin cannot believe what his father is saying, but Gawain responds that when the son is so resolved like that, there is no way to convince him otherwise, and he tells his son that he can be proud, because he found what he wanted to do and decided to follow that path. So now he must continue until the end, and he intends to help him, because after all that is the role of every father. Some time later, Shin is testing his magical energy with the campfire, while receiving help from his father. Upon trying, his hand gets burned and his father throws a bucket of water on him. He explains that previously with the goblin he managed to understand upon touching it, but now he wanted to test what would happen if someone with magical energy touched a natural phenomenon. And the result was that the red flames became blue and spread through his accumulation. His father says that he cannot see this magical energy, but from what he just saw he knows very well that his son was telling the truth. Marie becomes jealous upon seeing that the father and the brother are getting along very well, and Shin, to try to cheer her up, comments that it was thanks to her that he managed to discover the existence of magic. Marie becomes happy, because she understands that he does this to draw attention. At that moment, Shin remembers that he did not create magic out of nowhere, but what he just did resembles fire magic very much, and begins to fantasize that soon he will be able to launch a fireball everywhere. While his father worries about the strange expressions that his son makes, from that day on, Shin begins to experiment fully with magic. With the help of his father, it is a process of trial and error, and more errors than successes. At a certain moment, the father recommends that he rest a little and go fetch a hot drink. At that moment, Marie asks if he does all of this because of the magical experiments. Shin is surprised to see her at home, and then explains that he is trying to use his magical energy with fire, but he can only experiment when their father is present. And, including, his father is quite enthusiastic about all of this that he is doing. So Shin thanks Rose for what happened before, saying that when he defeated the goblin, she encouraged him. But Rose responds that she is the one who should thank him, since everyone is safe thanks to him. Curious, she asks what happened to his sister, since she always stays by his side calling him non-stop. Meanwhile, we see that she is training intensely, trying to get stronger to protect her brother. Rose comments that if something happens, she asks that he stay by her side, for she is certain that this is what she wants. Marie continues training, while Shin makes a summary of everything he learned. First, the more magical energy he accumulates, the larger the flames become, and the more energy spent, the more powerful the magic is. Second, it also reacts to other heat sources besides fire, and the higher the temperature, the more his hand combusts. Third, if he touches fire while he is in a state of magical charge, the fire spreads and continues burning normally. He also tried with a glove, but the magical energy comes out of it, and the fire propagates in the same way. So everything indicates that magical energy works as a flammable substance. Up to the moment, all of his experiments have been very useful. But the goal is to manage to manipulate fire, which seems very distant. He would like very much to manage to create the spheres of light, just like the trout do. But at that moment his sister Marie says that she can do that, and shows it to him, leaving Shin quite surprised, and even Rose can also do it. Shin becomes full of envy and tries, and Rose recommends imagining that he is pulling his energy, which makes Shin understand that instead of imagining that he is expelling it, he needs to imagine that he is pulling, and thus he manages to create a ball of light. Everyone becomes quite excited, with the exception of his father, who cannot see absolutely anything. After that, they go to the courtyard to put it into practice, where Shin uses a flint and tests what he learned, creating a fireball that even his father can see. Shin becomes very excited, since he finally managed to do that, even if it was something weak. Still, it was a test, and after spending 30 years wishing to use magic, he finally succeeded. He begins to fantasize again, while his father gets startled upon seeing his strange expression. He names the fire magic as flare, even though it is still in an experimental phase and cannot yet be used as an attack. Already a month has passed since the attack of the goblins, and Shin is running, because to use flare he needs to move his magical energy constantly. But the more he organizes it, the more the amount released decreases, so he thinks that he should create a new plan. At that moment he sees his sister training very hard, but she ends up hurting her hands. The father recommends that she rest, but she does not want to stop. So Shin steps in the middle and says that their father is right. She ignores him and continues training. Then Shin speaks firmly, and she glares at him irritatedly. But afterward she apologizes and decides to rest. The father says that he does not need to worry, because his sister is just a little upset. Later Shin speaks about electricity with his father, explaining that it is a phenomenon very similar to lightning strikes, and asks if there is any tool or creature that produces it. He is looking for another line of magical investigation, since he became stagnant in fire magic, but he intends to return to it later. He assumes that, just like fire, magical energy must react with electricity. His father thinks a little and says that nothing like that exists, but he remembers that even without reaching the level of a lightning strike, he has already seen a similar phenomenon, and his friend Gracio commented something about it. For that reason he says that he will go to the city to investigate better. Shin goes to look for his sister so that she accompanies them, but she refuses because she has many things to do and ends up closing the door in their faces. Sometime later, at Gracio's blacksmith shop, they discover that there exists a mineral called lightning mineral. The detail is how they are going to obtain it. If they ask for permission and go to the mines, they can get it. The problem is transporting it, since it causes discomfort and is very dangerous, and since they cannot move it easily, they simply leave it there. But Shin is always in search of a solution and asks Gracio if there exists any tree that has white and sticky sap. Gracio responds no. Then Shin asks again if there exists a mineral called mica, which is composed of many layers that can detach into thin sheets. Gracio asks if he is referring to paper crystal and shows him a little of what he had stored. Shin takes it and thinks that this mineral can be used to manufacture insulating sheets. The problem is how to produce one. Gracio asks what that boy is thinking, but Gawain responds that Shin does not usually think like a child. He asks a question to Gratz wanting to know if there are larger paper crystals, but he answers no, but if they go to the commercial district they can get many. The one that he has in his hand is worth 4,000, making Shin think that for that price a family could eat in a very good restaurant. He is surprised to see that his father is willing to buy it. Gawain says that he does not need to worry about the price, since he never asked him for anything, and can be a little spoiled this time. But obviously if he did not have the money, he would say no. Shin becomes very happy. Later on, after managing to obtain a lightning mineral, Shin tests it, this time accompanied by his mother. Upon activating it, some red lightning bolts begin to come out of the rock, but they disappear in the very next instant. His father says that he does not need to worry, since he had many errors until managing to achieve the fire magic. However, Shin begins to laugh just like a psychopath, because his experiment actually worked successfully, explaining that magical energy does not only have flammable properties, but also imitates the phenomenon with which it comes into contact. This makes it so that his dream of using different types of magic is much more possible than he imagined. The problem is how to transform this energy into an electric current and launch the lightning strikes through his hands. Because if the energy that he emits explodes upon touching the mineral, he will never be able to achieve a suitable form. He thinks that there is something basic that he is doing wrong, but afterward he realizes that it is not strictly mandatory that magical energy must have the shape of a sphere, and begins to create different shapes with it. Becoming much more flexible in his experiments, he goes to his sister's room excitedly to tell her, but she is not there, so he goes out to look for her and finds her at a lake, practicing against a wooden trunk. At that exact moment, the staff breaks, and Shin remembers the words that Rose had told him. So he approaches her to ask for apologies, since she has always supported him whenever he wanted to create magic. But he was very arrogant and thought that he could give advice to her. Marie responds that he does not need to worry at all and admits that she became irritated when he did not stay by her side. But that was not his fault, she is just feeling jealous, because as an older sister, she is determined to always protect him. However, she could not do anything when that monster appeared in front of them. And if he had not interfered, she would have died. Obviously, she is very happy to be alive, but at the same time she is furious with herself, or not having done anything, and she cannot bear being protected by someone that she was supposed to protect. She does not hate him, because he is her little brother, and she will always love him very much. She simply cannot manage to forgive herself for being so weak, and for that reason she feels envy of his strength, which is why she is so determined to become stronger, for she believes that this way she will have more confidence, and she will be much more courageous. Shin gives her a hug and apologizes for not having realized how she was feeling, and for not having stayed right by her side, saying that he hopes that she can vent to him whenever she wants, since he is right there for that. Marie begins to cry and finds her brother's embrace at sunset by the edge of the lake. After that, her manner becomes even more exaggerated than before, to the point that Shin has to ask for a little bit of space, because she does not let him continue his experiments with magic. She continues crying and asks if he considers her useless. Shin does not answer that in the most gentle way possible, but afterward he tries to soften it so as not to hurt her feelings. So he goes back to his research. Now Shin manages to mold his magic completely at will, reaching the point of expanding it. The problem is that upon doing this it loses a lot of effectiveness. The more he spreads the volume of the energy, the weaker his magical power becomes, and in that state the magic does not sublimate. On the other hand, when he compresses it, the result is better and increases its potency. Unfortunately, this does not happen in the same way with electricity magic, but in one of the experiments, while he stretches his magic to touch the lightning mineral, it ends up being attracted back towards his own body. The girls ask if he is doing well, and Shin answers that they do not need to worry. In the beginning they thought that the magic went forward, but it is attracted toward the source of energy. Thanks to all of the experiments, Shin advanced very quickly, to the point of thinking that that world expects him to create magic. At that moment his father and his friend appear, and later on upon entering the house, his father reminds Shin that thanks to his idea they managed to extract the lightning mineral. But after they did that idiot Gratz used his own knowledge and began to extract the mineral from the mine to sell in his shop. Gratz asks for apologies from Shin for having used his idea to earn money, but Shin answers that he does not need to worry. After all, he did not do anything wrong. Gratz becomes quite surprised with that answer, but Shin says that that was already a possibility, and that he does not see anything wrong in that. However, his father makes a comment that this is not the only problem. After a while, Gracio takes them to his shop, specifically to his warehouse, where there is a large quantity of lightning mineral. He mentions that in the beginning people bought it because it was something unusual, but afterward nobody else wanted to buy it, and he ended up keeping the entire stock, which is why he asks Shin to create a way to sell all that mineral, since people have even already complained about the snapping noise coming from it, and if he does not resolve it in 3 days, he is going to lose the warehouse. Since the transportation idea was his, Gracio believes that he can find a solution. Shin accepts to help, but makes it very clear that he should not build up expectations. He asks why the stones are separated, and Gracio shows that when they are together they release a bolt of energy. Shin is quite impressed, and later in the shop, Gracio shows the mineral obtained after refining and smelting a lightning mineral. Shin asks if just like the other one it also releases bolts, and Gracio hands him another piece of metal so that he can test it himself. However, upon doing this nothing happens, so Shin asks at which stage of the refinement the effect disappears. Gracio responds that it vanishes after calcining to melt, and after that the process continues normally. At that moment, Shin asks his father to make a magical demonstration, and he allows it. So Shin uses his flint to light a furnace with his fire magic, leaving Gracio quite impressed, and he asks what it was that he did. Shin speaks that he only used magic, and upon seeing his father he expects an authorization, and when he receives permission he explains to Gracio what magic is. After the explanation, Gracio is quite surprised, and asks what would happen if the mineral were refined with that special fire. Shin responds that he also does not know. After all, he is still studying magic. So Gracio decides to refine the material, and Shin resolves to stay to follow all the progress. After some time of smelting, both minerals become ready, and upon being brought close together they release a bolt. Everyone congratulates Shin on his achievement, and he decides to call this metal lightning steel. After that they practically do not sleep, and begin to produce a lot of lightning steel, until everyone becomes exhausted. But they create two new innovative products. The first is the lightning flint, with which clients will be able to light campfires more quickly, and the second is the lightning lamp, which illuminates everything without the need for oil lamps. His father becomes very proud, and his little sister as well. At that moment, Gracio holds his hand and comments that he is someone very special, that he already knew that from the very beginning. When he was going to reveal something, Gawain interrupts him, so that he does not continue speaking, and Gracio, pretending that nothing happened, asks for apologies, leaving the silence a bit awkward. This makes Shin wonder what he was going to say. To break the ice, Shin's mother suggests going to eat seafood. Later on, Gracio says goodbye to the children, and thanks Shin, saying that he will do everything possible to compensate for everything he did. His sister asks what he means by compensate, and Shin explains that while they were manufacturing the items, he had an idea, and that with Gracio's help his magic is going to change a lot. After that, Gracio's shop becomes very popular with the new products. Meanwhile, Shin explains to the girls that fire needs oxygen to maintain itself, but if it is removed, the flame goes out. He decides to test what happens with magical fire. Upon covering and uncovering, he notices that it does not go out. The magical energy seems to function as an amplifier, or perhaps as a fuel. Upon thinking about this, he has an idea. He uses the flint to create a fireball, and asks his sister to attack with the other one. Upon colliding, both powers explode. Shin asks worriedly if she is alright, while Rose asks if he already knew that this was going to happen. He responds surprised that he only expected the fireball to get bigger. Rose comments that the intensity does not correspond to the amount of magical energy, making Shin think that that exploded as if it were gunpowder being ignited. Recalling his entire journey of experiments, he arrives at a conclusion about electric current and runs to the lightning mineral, launching a current of magic into it. Upon seeing the result, he tells the girls that that is not magical energy, or better, it is and is not at the same time, because what they are seeing is the air reacting to the magical energy. He gives an example of his flare, which was activated only with magical energy without oxygen, while the lightning mineral showed a clear resistance to the air to activate itself. In other words, magic fulfills the same function as air, and for that reason it reacts with other elements, amplifying their properties. And he continues making a perverted expression, excited because he made a major breakthrough. He decides to call this phenomenon composite magic. A while later, Gracio delivered the object that Shin had requested, some very strange protective gloves, made with paper crystals and fire-resistant leather. Shin tests them and makes a great magical spectacle, leaving everyone around surprised. He even launches his lightning strikes and becomes excited for finally having succeeded. His sister says that he is amazing, and Shin begins to cry with emotion, for finally having realized his dream of using magic. Everyone becomes very happy with his achievement, but later at night when Shin gets up to drink water, he overhears his father conversing with Gracio. Gracio comments that Shin's magic is an unparalleled feat, and that it should not remain a secret. Shin's mother tells Gawain that he must remember that Shin is still a child, and might end up revealing his abilities inadvertently to other people. Gawain responds that sometimes he cannot help but think about how special Shin is, because he is a boy that person entrusted to them to care for. Upon hearing this, Shin becomes quite surprised and thinks that then they are not from the same blood family. The next day, Shin trains his magic and already presents great improvements. Marie and Rose praise him, but he keeps remembering the conversation of the adults and thinks about it in a confused manner. To avoid these thoughts, he goes back to concentrating on composite magic, discovering that by combining two spheres of magical energy, he manages to increase its quantity and density, resulting in synergistic magic. He improves various versions of his magics, amplifying his abilities, but upon trying to combine them he obtains no reaction. Afterward, he goes to the lake to try to practice water magic, but does not achieve the expected result. In the previous experiments, he noticed that magical energy reacted with the atmosphere, acquiring properties of the air. So he tries to repeat this with water, but it does not react as before. He changes the plan and uses accumulation in the water, managing only to lift a few drops. The girls become excited upon seeing that he can use water magic, but Shin finds this quite useless. Upon leaving the lake, he tries again, now gathering the water present in the air, but the result is only feeling his hand more humid. But afterward, he understands that the size of the energy he used in his hand was only the size of a basketball, which is why he only managed to accumulate the particles of water that were within that space. In the second attempt, he expands the radius of his magical energy to manage to accumulate the water from the air within that area, and thus he manages to create a bubble of water, leaving the girls quite impressed, since he literally drew a ball of water out of nowhere. Shin explains that he spread his energy as thin as he can to gather the water from a larger area. This consumes much less energy than trying to move the water directly. Marie becomes quite excited and asks what he is going to call this magic. After thinking a little, Shin names it Aqua. The girls try it and succeed on the first try, while Shin thinks that if it continues like this, soon he will reach the maximum level of magic. Now is a good time to think about the next stage of research. Sometime later, they hide away with Gracio to go hunt some monsters. He alerts them that before that, they need to register at the Adventurers Guild. Before starting, Gracio asks if they are certain, and the girls speak that they are resolved. Shin requests for him not to tell anything to his father. Gracio already knows that well. Upon arriving at the reception, he informs the receptionist that he wants to register those 3 little ones, and shows that he is a platinum rank adventurer. The receptionist asks if those 2 adventurers are going to recommend them, and they become quite startled when they discover that Gawain is at the location. Gawain speaks to the receptionist that he is also going to recommend them, and shows that he is a diamond rank adventurer. Everyone at the location is left without believing it, since they had never seen such a high level. He then warns the children that first they are going to fulfill a request, and afterward they are going to converse with them. Upon leaving the guild, everyone asks for apologies from Gawain. He says that he already knew that something like this was going to happen, not exactly hunting monsters, but that they were plotting something. He noticed this because Marie is very bad at hiding things, since she always averted her gaze when she spoke with her mother or with him. Marie, embarrassed, asks for apologies from the others. Gawain scolds them for not having warned about anything, principally Gracio, who is left without words. He requests that they explain the motive, and after listening he understands the reasons. He values the fact that they requested help from a strong and trustworthy adult as an escort. He concludes that even without him being there, with Gracio's help they would have no problems. But in that world nothing is totally safe, so he decides to accompany them as well. After that, they go to a hideout of kobolds, where Gawain finishes off those monsters easily, destroying all of them. Shin becomes quite impressed seeing that his father is extremely strong. However, those already weakened kobolds do not serve to test his magic. But Gawain warns that he only thinned out the opponents a little, for it is a matter of time until the kobolds that were out hunting return. As soon as he speaks, the kobolds appear. Gawain explains that kobolds are monsters weaker than goblins, and Marie becomes nervous upon remembering the goblin that almost killed her. Even so, they need to act. Marie and Rose go to the front line, while Shin stays in the rear. He initiates an attack by launching flare and combining it with another energy, creating a bomb and exploding all the kobolds ahead. Another kobold advances against Shin, but Marie interrupts and blocks the attack. Rose also does a great job and everyone cooperates, managing to defeat the kobolds with efficiency. In the end, Marie feels much more confident, and Gawain congratulates them, saying that they moved very well for the first time. Then he says that it is time to go to the next nest, to make the most of the combat experience. So they clear the next nest, but they become very tired. Gracio comments that they still lack quite a bit of stamina, but the important thing is that now they can already fight. Gawain warns that he will collect the spoils, so they can rest a little. Later, while they are resting, Shin notices something strange inside a nest, and decides to investigate. Upon entering, they find a strange light, which ends up being a fairy trapped in a cage. Shin suggests freeing her and the girls agree. When they free her, the fairy flies free, and just observes the children before leaving. At night, upon arriving home, Gawain has a headache, since his wife Emma is very furious, and strikes him with a candelabra. While the young ones panic, Later, after explanations, she says that they can rest assured, for she already knew everything through her husband. She says that she was only angry, because it is not normal for them to return full of wounds. She understands that when Gawain becomes obsessed with something, he loses track of what is happening around him, and probably wanted them to gain experience facing monsters. Although the first hunt left everyone in a bad state, she makes it clear that as long as they do not hurt or disrespect other people, they can do whatever they want. And she only wants everyone to take great care of themselves, since as long as they are alive, she can be happy. And after giving them a hug, she warns that it is time to take a bath before dinner, and they end up dragging Shin along too, who feels extremely uncomfortable with the situation. He begins to think that they are family, and that family does not take a bath together. But his mother begins to wash him and lean against him, so Shin becomes desperate, and enters the bathtub while he thinks that he is simultaneously in heaven and in hell. Afterward, he remembers the time he spent with his family, everything he lived with them, and all the support he received, so he tells them that he is a very happy person. After that, 2 years passed, and Shin is now facing a goblin. Currently, he is a bronze rank adventurer, and it shows that his magical abilities have improved quite a bit, since he manages to defeat a goblin with a typhoon. But he still feels that he has a lot to improve. At that moment, Marie and Rose approach him, since they were also hunting goblin. They are now 12 years old, but they grew quite a bit. In these 2 years, Shin's ability to measure magical energy also improved, since now he is capable of seeing the magical energy of each individual just by looking at the person. But he has not found anyone with more magical energy than Rose and Marie. Lately, the hunting jobs have increased, due to the large quantity of monsters that appeared suddenly, and not only that, but also the number of destitute people increased quite a bit. While walking through the city, they decide to greet Gratio, where Shin offers to help him refine the lightning steel, but Gratio responds that it is not necessary, and shows that he has already finished the gloves that he had requested. Shin becomes excited because this is an improved version of the previous one. Gratio congratulates them, because they achieved great feats without Gawain and without him. The girls warn that soon they are going to achieve silver rank, which is a great achievement at that age, and he doubts that there exist other people of the same age who achieve this rank. At that moment, Marie approaches her brother and asks him, since now he can use many types of magic, what does he intend to do now? Shin responds that he wants to be able to use even more magic. She asks again what he intends to do after achieving that, commenting that if it were not for him, the lightning lamps would not have been created. His magic was a blessing, and if it were not for him, she would not be breathing on that day. She also does not want him to misunderstand her. He is free to do whatever he wants. She simply thinks that perhaps magic can be used for something different, since for better or for worse, a special power ends up affecting others. And even though she is aware that it will not be something simple, she is certain that there must exist something more. Some time later, Shin is practicing with his father, testing his new gloves. However, his father fights against him and manages to repel all of his magical attacks. Even so, Shin uses his intelligence and utilizes his wind magic to elevate himself, and traps his father with earth magic. His father is quite surprised and asks what he did, and he explains that he calls his air magic foul, and that by expanding the air in the earth, he manages to create a trap. But using magic while moving leaves him quite exhausted, and he understands that he needs to improve his physique. But it is evident that he had a good evolution. His father becomes quite enchanted with the improvement he had with the gloves, and Shin says that even though it is a little difficult to control at times, since it does not direct exactly how he wants, he hopes that in the future he can use it to fly through the skies. This catches his father by surprise, and he comments that this is truly a great dream. At that moment, they are interrupted by Marie, who also wants to train with her father. They begin the training, where Marie demonstrates great swordsmanship skills, being fast and precise in her attacks. Despite her being only 12 years old, Shin observes her fascinated, since Marie is very athletic, but she is also a bit impulsive and ends up losing to her father. He comments that she is doing very well, but is very impatient, but he is certain that soon she will be able to beat him. She gives thanks and then says goodbye to continue training. Then Shin approaches his father and asks how he sees his sister. Gawain responds that despite her being only 12 years old, it is impressive for her to be at the level of the best swordsman. However, her muscles are like those of an adult, and her physical capacities are superhuman, something that clearly is not normal for a child. Shin wonders if this is due to magic or magical energy, becoming a little worried about this possibility. But his father asks him not to worry, because up to the moment there has been no problem. After that, the young man reunites with Rose to help eliminate the pests from the plantations. When Marie sees the pests that she needs to remove, she becomes quite nervous, and thus spends the entire day helping Rose take all the caterpillars off the plants. Shin, seeing that his sister continues smiling as always, understands that there is no reason for concern. At the end of the day, Marie manages to collect only 3 worms, but promises that next year she will get more than them. Suddenly, the sky changes drastically and a lot of rain begins to fall. Shin observes a strange aurora in the sky. When they are about to leave, he hears his sister fall to the ground. He tries to wake her up desperately, but she does not react. They take her to Rose's house where Shin wonders what happened. At that moment, Rose comments that this is very possible, but at that time they are interrupted by Gawain and Emma, who arrive worried. She opens her eyes, but she is very slow and does not react, nor says anything. Rose explains to everyone that it could be a matter of the lethargy disease, a very strange illness that spread through the city. She only heard rumors when she went shopping, and they say that people simply collapse suddenly, even though they are conscious. They do not react to anything. They just keep staring into the void. These are the symptoms, which is why they called it lethargy disease. Emma becomes quite worried and asks if there is a cure, but up to the moment nobody knows of any, since there has been no case of recovery, and since the causes are unknown. Nobody knows what to do. Shin becomes very worried and scared for his sister. Gawain warns that it is time to take her to the doctor as soon as possible and asks Shin to return home with his mother. But he refuses because he wants to accompany them. Gawain does not allow it since this is the most dangerous time and more monsters appear. Shin responds that he knows how strong he is. But if monsters attack, it is not possible for him to protect his sister and fight at the same time. He knows that he is just a child, but he is determined to find a way to help. Gawain ends up accepting when he sees his determination, and then they head off desperately at high speed toward the city, while the rain continues falling. At that moment, Shin notices a strange light in the sky like an aurora borealis and asks his father if he is also seeing that. But Gawain cannot see anything other than a rainy night. Shortly after, Shin notices a pack of blood wolves, which feed on human blood and are persistent with their prey. Shin warns his father that he will take care of them, while Gawain increases the speed. He takes advantage of the rain to accumulate water from the environment and launch projectiles against the wolves. The detail is that despite it being quite effective, there are still many wolves. Gawain also fights against them. But suddenly a strange breeze blows and the wolves run away. Shin notices that something is approaching. He becomes desperate and asks his father to accelerate. At that moment, a strange specter appears before Shin. He tries to warn his father, but Gawain also cannot see it, which makes Shin understand that perhaps only people with magic can see it. And he begins to suspect that that creature might follow the same principles of magic. His father comments that if he can see that monster, then after all it really exists. At that moment he is interrupted by Shin, who hears the terrifying sadness of the monster. Gawain is still unable to see and hear the creature. Shin becomes desperate and attacks it with a water projectile, but it simply passes through, and when the monster is about to grab him, Shin captures it using the same method he used with the goblin, surprised to see that his magic managed to purify it. The monster goes on top of the wagon to try to attack his father, but the specter is repelled by the light of the lightning lamp, and for a moment Gawain manages to see it. The specter tries to escape, but Shin elevates himself using fall to purify it. Upon falling he panics, but is saved by his father. Afterward they continue on their way, and Gawain asks what kind of monster with human form that was, since he had never seen anything like it. Shin is surprised to notice that he managed to see it, and Gawain responds that he only managed to when it got close enough. At that moment Shin notices the lightning lamp. Later on, upon arriving at the city, they go directly to the hospital to look for Dr. Alfonso, but upon entering they discover that many other people are in a lethargic state. Shin asks for help, but the doctor's assistant warns that he needs to wait his turn, so there is no other way but to wait. Sometime later, when the doctor examines Marie, he confirms that she really has the lethargy disease, and that there is nothing they can do for her, since there is no cure, or at least up until now nothing has been found. Shin becomes desperate, and remembers that his sister had promised that next year they would help Rose. He recalls that she was always smiling, and cannot accept that she is going through this now. He begs the doctor to help his patients, saying that before all of this happened, his sister was smiling as always, but there is nothing that can be done. The next day, after Marie's diagnosis, Shin's family decides to remain in the city of Historia. Gracio offers a room that before was a storage room, allowing them to stay for as long as they need until Marie improves. Before leaving, he says not to worry. Sometime later, Shin remains very worried about his sister, since there are no signs of improvement. Gawain enters the room to warn that he wants to introduce him to someone, but Shin refuses, saying that he wants to stay by his sister's side and will not leave there unless it is to find a doctor who can cure her. However, his father tells him that 4 nights ago, when they were attacked by the invisible monster, on that very same day there were dozens of incidents in which people were attacked and murdered by the same invisible monster, and most likely, they all fell into the hands or the claws of the creature that they faced. Somehow, they managed to repel that thing, so he is the only one who can now face it. Shin responds that this has nothing to do with him, but his father comments that leaving that monster free will only cause new victims. Shin continues refusing, saying that he only wants to stay by his sister's side. His father becomes a bit irritated and asks if he intends to just let more victims happen. Shin responds that this is not his problem, so the father asks if he will think the same when this same monster begins to attack people from the city and from their village. Even so, Shin insists that he has no obligation to help anyone. He only wants to stay with his sister. The father becomes quite frustrated and Shin asks if he is not worried about his own daughter. Gawain responds that of course he is, and that he would sacrifice everything to save her, even sell his own soul if he could, but he does not have that option, and for that reason they can only do what is within their reach. And if Shin decides to collaborate, many people could be saved, so he begs his son to help them. This makes Shin remember Marie's words, who said that perhaps magic could be used for other things, since for better or for worse it always ends up affecting others, and that she believed he could save many people when the moment arrived. Upon remembering this, Shin decides to face the invisible monster, thinking that his sister would probably tell him to help others, but afterward he himself comments ironically, so he accepts to help. At that moment he notices something strange. His sister's figure seems to smile, but soon he feels a strange sensation and notices that her magical energy has disappeared. He runs out and asks his mother to take care of her. Upon arriving at the city, he notices that none of the people emit magical energy. When he returns to his father, he reveals his conclusions. The people with the lethargy disease do not possess magical energy in their bodies, and on the streets he found nobody with magical energy. Before, he used to be able to see a few people here and there, but now there is not a single one. Even if it is just a possibility, he begins to suspect that it is precisely the people with magical energy who end up being affected by the disease. The lethargy disease currently has no treatment, and its causes have not been determined either. For that reason, just as he did with magic by creating it out of nothing, he will do the same and create a cure for this illness. At that moment, his father reminds him that he wanted to introduce him to someone, and after that, they meet with a duke named Balf. Gawain apologizes for coming without prior notice and takes the opportunity to introduce his son, Shin. Balf observes him with a terrifying gaze, while Gawain explains the reason for the visit and informs him that, as a measure against the invisible monster, he proposed equipping all the guards with lightning lamps. While he continues speaking, Duke Balf suddenly begins to cry, complaining and crawling across the room, saying that ever since he began to rule the city of Historia everything goes wrong, and that he only wanted a peaceful life as a duke. Gawain responds that unfortunately, that will not be possible. Shin is outraged by the scene, but Balf recovers his posture, next stating that the merchant group tried to monopolize the lightning lamps, which made it very complicated to obtain a few units for the soldiers. Gawain begins to praise him, but Balf says that it will do no good to praise him. Shin cannot believe the situation, but soon they move on to the main subject, explaining that the monster and magic are somehow related. Shin discovers that the Duke already knew about the existence of this, something that his father had mentioned previously. The Duke suggests that the solution would be to gather people with magical aptitudes and teach them to use magic to defeat the monster. However, Shin responds that it is not that simple, since learning magic takes a long time and most people with magical energy are sick. Even so, he speaks that he has an idea. Balf gets excited but changes his expression upon hearing that Shin wants to experiment on living beings. Shin explains that when they are healthy, people possess magical energy that returns after resting, but the infected have lost this energy and cannot recover it for some reason. If he manages to inject magical energy into the patients, perhaps he can cure them. The problem is that injecting magical energy into those who already possess it is dangerous. But if he cannot make this work, the infected will never be able to be saved. Shin reflects that in the development of medicine, the most important thing is sacrifices, since people are not saved with pretty words. He decides that he is willing to carry any dishonor to save his sister and informs the Duke that he intends to perform tests on living beings that would already be destined to die, making it clear that he wants to experiment with monsters. Shin clarifies everything, and Balf not only authorizes him to conduct experiments on living beings, but also promises to provide collaborators who are experts in medicine and in monsters. However, he wonders why someone like a Duke believed the words of a simple boy. To him, there is something suspicious about it, but he apologizes and comments that perhaps one day he will reveal something. A while later, Shin meets with these collaborators, where the first is Cole Alistair, Dr. Alphonse's assistant, who makes it clear that he is there by order of the Duke, since he considers it a waste of time to follow the orders of a simple boy. Rafina also introduces herself. She is the daughter of Marquis Alfred, Lord of the Sepanat region and captain of one of the royal squadrons. Lastly, the monster expert named Git introduces herself, but she is quite timid and speaks very softly. Shin thanks the three for having gathered and warns them that that mission is not a game. Next, he demonstrates a bit of his magical abilities, leaving the three surprised. He explains that that is a technique developed by him called magic, which amplifies and maintains natural phenomena by materializing the magical energy present in their bodies. However, when this magical energy is used in excess, the body is overtaken by an extreme fatigue that prevents even movement, exactly the same symptoms presented by those infected with the lethargy disease. After that, we see Rafina almost dying while trying to climb a hill wearing heavy armor, while Shin and Git wait for her at the top, since Cole needed to return to the hospital to continue working. The three went out in search of monsters for experiments. While awaiting Rafina, Git comments to Shin that she was called to investigate the invisible monster and asks if it has any relationship with the lethargy disease. Shin responds that to deal with this disease, it is necessary to find ways to provide magical energy. Since this energy is dangerous and can kill a person, he needs to do experiments with monsters, which he is already defeating using this same method, burning them from the inside out. But to treat the lethargy disease, he needs to find a way to provide magical energy to the patients until they are filled, but without killing them. He explains that he needs her there because she is a specialist in monsters and in capturing the invisible nocturnal monster called Bright. At that moment, Git is quite surprised and asks if he really saw one. Upon discovering that Shin knows the monster, her shy manner disappears. She becomes thrilled because she has discovered a new type of monster. Before them, a goblin suddenly appears, which is something rare to see outdoors, since they normally only inhabit large underground burrows. But Git does not worry in the slightest. She is only excited to see such a goblin. Meanwhile, Rafina is tired of carrying that armor, so she destroys it, moves towards the goblin, and begins to introduce herself again with her long name. She demonstrates that she is quite strong, while Shin takes advantage of the goblin's carelessness to attack it from behind, but he misses. When attempting to attack again, he notices that his magical energy is accumulating excessively. The goblin disappears into the smoke and reappears behind Rafina. She manages to dodge, but she almost suffers a serious fall. At that moment, Shin creates a water sphere, generating a small rain, and then attacks the goblin with lightning, making the electrical attack more effective. But even so, it still causes no damage. Rafina exploits the opening and hits it in the neck, then reunites with the others. She comments that it was the first time she had seen a goblin, but in her homeland there are many orcs, and she lives fighting against them. She begins to boast about her skills, and Shin reminds her that she forgot the main objective, which is to keep the monsters alive and not to kill them. Some time later, Shin is at home being attended to by Rose, who is helping his mother with Marie. She asks to help Shin as well, but he says it is difficult, since she is already helping his mother, and also because going to the historical town all the time is complicated. She understands, but she becomes sad because her best friend is sick and she can do nothing. Shin says that she is already helping immensely just by assisting his mother and being useful. Later, Shin goes with Cole to the clinic, as they seem to have found a clue for the treatment. Upon arriving, he notices a patient with slight signs of activity, while the most severe cases do not react. Upon touching him, Shin perceives a small presence of magical energy, which leads him to think that, according to his hypothesis, the decrease in magical energy might be the cause of the disease. He remembers the conversation with Cole, when he said he wanted to experiment on the sick by stimulating their magical energy by touching them with his own energy, making them feel light and heat. All the patients with the lethargy disease once possessed magical energy, which is why it might be useful to try. After that, they begin the experiments and notice that the heartbeats of the patients accelerate slightly after receiving Shin's magical energy. Back in the present, Shin asks if he can trust him more now, and Cole replies that he only continues because it is worth a try. At that moment, a doctor approaches to ask if they achieved anything, and Shin replies that thanks to that, he managed to understand many things. Cole pulls him outside and, outdoors, warns him that he cannot speak so casually about magical energy and about the treatment in front of the others, because the doctors are dedicated to finding a cure. If he says he found some type of treatment, the medical community will turn its eyes toward him. By drawing too much attention, they will try to intervene. For this reason, he recommends that they exercise caution. Shin expresses his gratitude, saying that he is a very careful person. But Cole replies that it is not exactly that, it is that Shin is far too reckless and needs to take better care of himself, without revealing too much information. Shin smiles and says that he is a good person, since even though he dislikes him, he gave this advice for his own good. Cole becomes completely embarrassed and tells him to shut up, saying that he is only thinking about the patients. At night, Shin tries to apply the treatment to his sister, but he becomes afraid, since he cannot be reckless. He remembers that to create magic he had to go through a long process, and decides that he will do the same to find a cure. The next day, while the blonde girl fights with the kobolds, he and Git begin to experiment by applying magical energy to an unconscious kobold to see how much it can endure. Upon reaching 30%, the monster ends up being destroyed. They conclude that kobolds can accumulate up to 50% of magical energy, while normal goblins only reach 30%. Git then warns that when touched by magic, even a small amount already burns it, and that this seems to be a purification effect. But perhaps in humans the reaction is different. The battle-obsessed blonde asks if she can already destroy all the kobolds. After receiving Shin's approval, she finishes everything off, but she ends up falling in a pathetic manner and tries to disguise it by saying there was a trap. And to avoid embarrassment, she announces that it is time to leave, but attempting to disguise it made it even more awkward. Upon arriving home, Shin remembers Git's words, that perhaps the effect is different in humans. At that moment, Rose arrives bringing trout from the lake. Shin tests his magic on them, and they manage to endure 100% of the energy without being burned like the monsters. This makes him think that perhaps in humans there is also a different reaction, just like in the trout. He tries to ask Rose if he can practice with her, but he refrains from speaking. However, Rose perceives what he wanted to say and tells him that he has her permission. She understands that Shin wants to observe the reaction of his magical energy in a human who still possesses magic, and the only person with magical energy who is still conscious is her. For this reason, she says that he does not need to worry, because she will do anything to help Marie. Shin thanks her, but she replies that it is natural to help her friend. Before starting, Shin asks her to warn him in case she feels pain. Then he initiates the process and begins to accumulate his magic in her. And she notes that she only feels a slight heat. Shin continues increasing the intensity, but upon reaching 50%, he remembers that the monster was burned before, and he stops. However, Rose requests that he continue, and in the end, he finishes by accumulating 100% of his magical energy in her. He discovers that apparently, people with magical energy are not affected in the same way as monsters. Shin decides to test the transfer of small amounts of energy continuously. Rose asks him to begin, but he is still worried. She reassures him, saying that everything will be fine. Shin holds her hand and thanks her, but at that moment, both become nervous and try to change the subject to make the atmosphere more normal. Meanwhile, the soldiers begin to collect the lightning lamps, since nothing has appeared and they believe there is no longer any danger. They comment that they were only used for a month and now say they are no longer necessary. Cole comments that he does not think these lamps serve much purpose, but the girl points a sword at him and says that Shin is doing too much. He does not sleep properly investigating the disease and is still obtaining results. If they have not been attacked until now, it is because of the lamp that he invented. For this reason, she tells him to stop complaining, otherwise she will truly get angry. He apologizes, admitting that deep down he knows this. Thanks to Shin, the research progressed in a way that not even the doctors managed to achieve. Git comments that the situation in other countries is the same, But neither the wraiths nor other types of monsters have been sighted. Shin thinks that perhaps they are monsters exclusive to that region. But Git says they might have existed since the Legret War. When Shin asks what that is, Rafina explains that it was a legendary war from 1,000 years ago, when several countries united to fight against demons. According to some theories, someone named Legret would have led the nations, or else it would be the name of a country that disappeared. At night in the Duke's castle, he reports that a certain night a curtain of red light appeared in the sky, which was called the nocturnal threat. He summarizes in a diary everything related to the lethargy disease and to the monsters that emerged on that day. Since day 90, Shin has been transferring magical energy to a mild patient, with positive effects representing a major breakthrough. On day 135, it is discovered that an excessive transfusion of energy causes the symptoms of the disease. Therefore, it is possible that it does not originate from a lack of magical energy, but rather from receiving energy in excess. People have already begun to forget the invisible monsters, but by order of the Duke, the production of the lightning lamps continued. On day 211, it was confirmed that the body gradually loses the transmitted energy. On day 299, Shin began to run out of magical energy more frequently and started to seek a way to increase his capacity. On day 350, there were no advances, and 212 days later no results were obtained either. Still, nobody could do anything except wait for Shin, with his impeccable lineage, to achieve results. Furthermore, it was also not possible to confirm the existence of the wraiths. The Duke had thought it would be a revelation of Legret, but there was no indication. And so ends the report. 2 years later, while they are at the clinic, the family members of the patients, merely upon seeing a smile on their faces, thank Shin. However, he is a bit disappointed for not having managed to cure them. Cole recommends that he should rest more often. Later, upon arriving home, he meets Rafina and Git, as everyone is going to have dinner together at his house. During dinner, everyone observes Shin with seriousness while his father requests that he rest a little more. He replies that he is not tired and that he still has plenty of energy. His father confesses that he and his mother have already talked a lot, and that at this pace he will end up getting sick before he can cure his sister. Rafina says that both are right, because he has been spending all his time dedicating himself daily to the treatment research. Everyone thinks he is exaggerating a bit. Since they are being annoying, Shin clarifies that he is neither tired nor worried, and that nothing of what is happening is hurting him. He wants to cure his sister and thinks about this every day. But he also knows that impatience does not help, and that it is important to rest. He explains that he has always researched magic, investigated something he did not even know existed, and managed to find and develop it. Compared to that, there is no cure he cannot find for his sister. He will continue investigating until he finds this cure, even if it takes his entire life, and he does not want them to think he is an idiot, because this is something he wants to do. His parents apologize for having thought wrongly, while Shin declares that he will save his sister. Later, when they go to sleep, Shin tells his sister that he will not give up. But suddenly the sky turns red just like that time before. Upon going out to investigate, he encounters Rose and asks her to stay with his mother and his sister. He continues, perceiving that the sky is filled with a large quantity of wraiths. Shin wonders why that is happening. At that moment, 2 guards pass by his side, unaware of what is happening, and before them appears one of these monsters. Shin becomes desperate and warns them to be careful, but they cannot see it, so he runs to help them. When the light of the lightning lamp hits them, the soldiers finally manage to see the monster. Shin eliminates the creature and becomes worried, because Historia and its entire population are in grave danger. After that, he informs the Count of everything that is happening. Despite being frustrated, the Count has no other option but to face them. So he orders one of the soldiers to warn the guard posts and the sentinels on the walls to stay alert and prepare the lightning lamps. He also decides to accompany them personally. After trying to convince the Duke for a while, he finally yields and Shin goes to meet with Commander Lant. However, the commander belittles him, saying that he does not believe these reports about invisible monsters. He accuses Shin of already having caused enough trouble with the lamps, and now inventing another absurd story, forcing all the soldiers to mobilize for nothing. Even though many soldiers do not believe him, Shin asserts that the wraiths truly exist. At that moment, Rafina arrives at the location, informing that she and her squad are at their disposal. The other soldiers merely comment with disdain that the useless ones have arrived. These are the soldiers that Shin saved previously. They introduce themselves as Dave and Rui. The commander says that they can do whatever they want or go back to the inn to sleep, as it makes no difference to him. Rafina replies that they cannot act like this in an emergency situation, and that currently she is the captain of Squad 75, demonstrating great determination. Then, Dave informs Shin that the previous captain resigned along with the rest of the group, because they did not want to remain in a squad that only received useless tasks. For this reason, Rafina volunteered to assume the position. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Rose advises Emma to rest a little, since she has spent a lot of time taking care of Marie. Emma does not want to walk away from her daughter, but Rose reassures her, saying that she does not need to worry, because she is certain that Shin is fine and will definitely find a cure. Meanwhile, the others are patrolling the city to check the movements of the wraiths. Currently, they are mobilizing toward the entrance, but while they run there, Shin observes a group of them in the city. He uses his magic to approach faster, but he is surprised to feel that he can use magic with much more ease. When he reaches the entrance, he warns the soldiers that they must stay alert because the monsters are approaching. However, they reply that they are not seeing anything. Furthermore, the only suspect who arrived there is himself. Shin uses his magic and begins to shoot in all directions, illuminating the area and causing the soldiers to finally be able to see the monsters. He eliminates the enemies with magic, impressing the soldiers who wonder what just happened. At that moment, Rafina arrives and informs that they are from Squad 75 of the Royal Guard and that they have orders from the Duke to defeat the invisible monsters. The soldiers, who previously did not believe, now can no longer deny what they are seeing. Shin climbs the wall and is left in disbelief upon seeing that there are more than 100 wraiths in the forest, all heading toward the city of Historia. He becomes worried and tries to think of a way to finish them off. Then he returns to the entrance and uses his magic to light the torches, allowing ordinary people to also be able to perceive the monster. Dave and Rui wonder how they will handle that, since they normally only receive tasks of no importance. But Shin says he will find a way. He thinks that he was reborn in that world and created magic precisely to protect those he loves and that place. The wraiths move towards them and Shin burns them one by one. Rafina orders the soldiers to defend the entrance while she assists Shin. She begins to fight using the torch, but it is not very efficient, and the worst part is that the torch begins to go out. She laments because she cannot use her sword, but then Dave has a brilliant idea. Upon filling his sword with the oil from the lamp, he lights it with the magical flame and hands it to Rafina. Now she manages to destroy the monsters thanks to her flaming sword. Rui almost suffers a fatal defeat, but Dave saves him. Meanwhile, Shin continues fighting intensely, impressed by having used magic more than 100 times and still not being tired. He supposes that this might be an effect of the nocturnal threat, since 2 years ago that excessive overload of magical energy had broken the balance of the body. Even so, the most important thing now is to fight, because without that they will not be able to survive. At that moment, all the wraiths begin to sacrifice themselves out of nowhere, using their own bodies to extinguish the magical flames. Shin becomes surrounded and decides to test a new technique by accumulating a large quantity of magical energy. Then he creates a storm of magical flames and manages to defeat all the monsters at once. But this exhausts him greatly, and the battle is still far from over. As more wraiths emerge from the forest, he is left in disbelief at being so tired, while he still needs to protect Historia and all the people. He cannot die there, because he still has many things to do. The battle receives free reinforcements and all the adventurers of the city arrive to help. Git appears and explains to all the adventurers what they must do to face the monsters. They use arrows ignited with magical fire and shoot at the points indicated by Shin, making the wraiths visible and attacking them. Shin is surprised by Git's brilliant plan, and she says she is happy that it worked. She also reveals that she was the one who gathered the adventurers, because she always saw how much Shin exerts himself excessively and wanted to do her part. Therefore, everyone works together, and they manage to defeat all the monsters. But the celebration is interrupted by Commander Lant, who asks what they are doing and accuses them of being suspects, as if they had posed as monsters to cause chaos. Rafina explains that they are adventurers, and that thanks to them the monsters were defeated. But Lant does not believe anything, because he himself cannot see anything. The commander comments that everything seems to indicate that they are showing their true intentions and accuses Shin of only wanting to get close to the Duke. Gawain steps in the middle and tells him to go to hell, saying that besides arriving late to the combat, he still wants to complain. He warns that if it were not for Shin, the city would have already been destroyed. All the adventurers confirm this, but the commander becomes even more nervous, orders them to be silent, and commands his soldiers to arrest everyone. The soldiers hesitate without knowing whether they should obey, but suddenly he begins to float and a demonic hand breaks his neck, killing him instantly. Shin observes while a type of demon appears before them and comments that it has been a long time since he saw the outside world and that he has finally managed to get out. Shin perceives that the magical energy that was in the sky is now concentrated in that man. Gawain asks who he is, and the creature replies that, as a generous god, he will forgive their insolence and introduces himself as Einwell, a noble and virtuous demon. Everyone is frightened by his identity, and Einwell speaks that they are quite ignorant for not knowing what a demon is, even though that is understandable. Since 1,000 years have passed, he reveals that he was imprisoned for a long time, but now that he is free, he will be kind and will kill them. Everyone enters a combat stance, but Shin warns that they must flee. With the snap of his fingers, Einwell causes an enormous explosion, destroying a large part of the city and leaving many wounded. Gid enters a panic, because she always wanted to see the demonic species that disappeared 1,000 years ago, but now she is very afraid of them. Shin warns that everyone needs to flee, because none of them can fully see his powers, and they will not be capable of defeating him. He also reveals that the horde of wraiths that appeared with the nocturnal threat was nothing more than a sign of the arrival of this monster, and that the true battle is only beginning. Gawain asks if the monster can use magic, and Shin replies that he is not certain. But he is overflowing with a lot of magical energy, and the worst part is that he possesses hundreds of times more power than he does. Upon hearing this, Gawain decides to stay to face him, saying that even though he is not capable of seeing his magical powers, he cannot simply flee. Meanwhile, Einwell is happy with the destruction of the city, while Shin thinks that if he continues like this, everyone will end up dying. He warns Gawain that he will also fight, since he is the only one who can see the enemy's powers. Gawain accepts and requests that the girls guide the people and evacuate the city. They agree and ask Shin to take care. Next, everyone puts themselves into action. Shin tells Gawain that he will face the monster face to face, while he must go around it and attack from behind when he has the opportunity, since that is their only chance of victory. Gawain asks him not to die, because he would not be able to face his family after that. Meanwhile, the demon continues devastating the city, but Shin moves forward and extinguishes the fire with his water magic. Einwell is surprised to see that he can use magic. When he observes him better, noticing his red eyes and hair, he asks if he is of the Legret lineage. Unlike the other humans without power, he wonders why there are no others like him and expects an answer. Shin tries to reply, but Einwell continues speaking. He says that in the end none of this matters, and humans have learned nothing since that event. He speaks that Shin is just a child with whom they are playing, and that he must die right there. Einwell launches a series of explosions, but Shin dodges and counterattacks with his water bullet. Einwell comments that the spell was interesting, but it does not reach his level. Shin becomes desperate and tries to evade. The demon prepares a powerful fire attack to finish everything, and Shin wonders what he must do to impede that, because if it continues like this, all his loved ones will die. This makes him gain even more determination to protect them. Meanwhile, the girls continue evacuating the civilians. In the hospital, more and more wounded arrive, and the white-haired doctor does not understand what is happening. Rafina meets with Dave and Rui and is relieved to see them alive. She requests that they continue helping with the evacuation, because she needs to go to Shin. But Git speaks that this can be dangerous and that she might die. When she notices what she said, she tries to correct herself, saying that it is not that she thinks Shin will die, but that the enemy is very strong. Rafina understands, but even so, she cannot refrain from going to help Shin. Meanwhile, Shin uses his magic to destabilize the demon's attack and manage to escape. Then, he counterattacks with a combined spell of water and thunder, but Einwell annuls it and comments that Shin's magic is interesting, but explains that for every existing spell, there is always another with a property capable of annulling it. Perhaps he discovered this on his own, but that is something basic for demons. He notices that Shin cannot use fire and lightning magic without that artifact and calls him a simple beginner. While using his lightning magic, he speaks that when the laws of the elements are understood, all magic becomes simple, and speaks that this is something Shin is never going to be able to achieve. When he is about to finish him off, Graz appears and attacks him from behind. But the blow causes no effect, and he ends up being hit by the lightning magic. Gawain also enters the fight, but the demon launches him far away, saying that human weapons are useless against him. Then the demon turns his attention back to Shin and says that he is an impressive child, as expected of someone of the Legret lineage. Because he liked him, the demon decides not to kill him, but rather to transform him into his servant, someone with a long life and great power, but without human consciousness, becoming just a puppet. Shin tries to escape, but he is captured. Upon showing his teeth, the demon reveals that he is a vampire. He bites Shin, and he begins to lose his strength. But when he is about to give up, he imagines a small fairy, and suddenly begins to cough up blood. The vampire becomes very angry, saying that Shin received the blessing of the fairies and calls him a traitor, saying that they interfered once again. He begins to weaken, but still tries to charge a powerful attack. At that moment, Rafina arrives to save him. Einwell begins to prepare another attack, and Shin asks Rafina to raise her arm. After that, he begins to accumulate magical energy, but he cannot charge everything fast enough. By luck, Graz and Gawain help him to gain time. Shin remembers his entire life since he arrived in that world, and fires a sphere of pure magical energy. Einwell counterattacks, but he did not expect that his own attack would end up exploding against himself, being consumed by his own flames. Before disappearing, he is confronted by Shin, who speaks to him that despite his power, he probably never studied or analyzed magic deeply. Shin explains that when flame magic comes into contact with magical energy, dangerous reactions can occur. Einwell curses his blood before disintegrating. Shin becomes extremely exhausted. Upon closing his eyes, he sees a small fairy. After that, he awakens startled, thinking that the demon had defeated him. But upon waking up, his mother embraces him with great relief because he has finally awakened. Later, the white-haired doctor examines him and informs that everything is in order, in addition to revealing that he remained unconscious for an entire week. After that, Graz and his father go to see him. Gawain relates that on that day he had left the village, but only later did he notice that the wraiths appeared, and for that reason he managed to arrive in time to help. Even so, he thinks he was not very useful, but Shin speaks that he and Graz truly helped, since they managed to sever the enemy's arms. They are curious because when they struck him, the body of the monster was much less resistant, and this was only possible because of him. Even though it was pure coincidence, Shin concludes that next time they must not use the same method. He also thinks that if the nocturnal threat returns and a monster like that appears again, they need to be prepared, so he becomes worried and asks about Rafina and Git. The doctor replies that they only have light injuries. Everyone is fine, but the damage was enormous and about 420 people died in the demon's attack. Shin blames himself for his weakness, believing that if he were stronger, fewer people would have died. Cole replies that it is not quite like that, because without him the city would have been destroyed, and the best he can do is to be proud of what he accomplished. Shin feels a gentle breeze, and because it is night, everything around him seems strange. He perceives that his magical energy increased greatly, even if not as much as the demons. The important thing is that it evolved. Upon controlling it, he requests to see his sister. When he arrives, he notices that perhaps infusing a large quantity of magical energy can cure the lethargy disease. Before, he did not have enough energy, but now it is different. He injects a large quantity of energy into Marie until she finally opens her eyes. It is still not enough immediately, so he continues. After a period of intense magical therapy and great effort from Shin, Marie finally regains consciousness and asks confusedly what is happening. Everyone is in shock and ends up crying with emotion, while Shin rejoices for having managed to bring magic to that world. Sometime later, Shin cures all the patients. Cole praises him, saying that he is truly impressive. Shin feels that, for now, the problem of the disease is resolved, but there is still another pending matter, the Legret lineage. Then he meets with the Duke and asks who he really is. On one occasion, the Duke almost commented about his origin and his parents. Despite having a son obsessed with something illogical, they were very understanding with him. Even being a duke, he immediately accepted the ideas that a simple boy like him proposed. At that time, he did not even show him his magic. However, he never remained in doubt about what he said about it, and about the magical energy, as if he already knew of its existence. The Duke asks his adoptive parents if he can reveal the truth. Gawain replies that they cannot continue hiding this from him. Then the Duke reveals that Shun is a descendant of the Legret, the name of a people who 1,000 years ago stood on the side of the humans and fought in an impeccable manner against the demon. They had red hair and eyes and utilized a mysterious power called sorcery. They managed to seal the demons in the battle of 1,000 years ago. But before the demons were sealed, they cursed the Legret, making everyone practically become extinct. However, the situation was reversed 12 years ago, when in Historia, the capital of the kingdom, before Her Majesty named Queen Luxuria, a mysterious woman appeared with a baby in her arms. She asserted that the baby was a descendant of the Legret, and that he would be the only light capable of saving the world, and for that reason they should raise him. Otherwise, all of humanity would fall. The queen was not very convinced, but if the boy truly were a Legret, a dangerous future could be approaching, so she decided to raise him. However, she could not raise him publicly, which is why she entrusted him to her old friends, Lord Gawain and Lady Emma. Shun asks if his sister knew about this, but Gawain reveals that they never had the courage to tell her. They apologize for having deceived him, but say that they raised him as if he were their own son. Shun confesses that in reality he already knew, because once he overheard a conversation about this. Even so, he says that they do not need to worry, because even without being related by blood, they will always continue to be his father and his mother. The only thing he finds curious is why the queen left him under their care, and Gawain explains that this happened because they are honorary nobles. Those who possess noble titles are considered nobles, but the honorary ones do not receive any official title. That is to say, it is a special position granted personally by the queen, which guarantees her support. Because of the importance of this status, honorary nobles do not possess their own domains. For this reason, Duke Malfit left a part of his lands under the responsibility of Gawain. Shun understands that honorary nobles do not interact much with other nobles. They live far away in the countryside. Therefore, this would be the best way to prevent anyone from discovering about the Legret, and at the same time protect him. And he comments that he understands that they are Legret, and that he can use magic. But what intrigues him is the fact that despite being just a child, he knows many other things. Shun wonders if he should confess that in reality he came from another world and was reborn in it. But he decides not to do so and merely says that this knowledge is in his memory. He apologizes and speaks that perhaps the woman who delivered him knows something about it. Shun asks one last question to the Duke, wanting to know what he should be now. Malfit responds that probably he will receive an invitation from the queen. After that, he meets with Marie. She requests that he hold her hand and confesses that she was a bit frightened because she remembers almost nothing, only a sensation of being alone and trapped in the darkness. But despite the isolation, she always heard his voice and the voices of her mother and her father, and that gave her strength to move forward the next day. After that, they leave Historia and return home. After 2 long years, everyone wanted to rest, for they knew that the peaceful days as a family would not last long. Shun understands that the physical abnormalities of his sister indicated a disease, probably caused by an excessive absorption of energy due to the nocturnal threat or to a physical enhancement magic. To reach this state, it is essential to perceive and control the internal magical energy and the flow of energy in the body. He is in search of the cure for the lethargy disease and spent 2 years observing the energy of monsters and humans. Now he puts all that experience into practice and is capable of using magics that improve his physical capabilities and a barrier for the entire body, similar to the one the demon utilized. Some days later, Shun receives a letter from the queen. Before departing, he says goodbye to everyone and asks his father to protect his family. He thanks his friends and also Graz for everything they did for him. Rafina approaches very energetically and warns that he needs to visit the kingdom, because he will be received at any moment. While she leans against him, Rose and his sister become jealous. Cole wishes him luck and Git also says goodbye. When it is Rose's turn, she says that she would like to go with him. but recognizes that it would be selfish. He replies that it is not so far and that he will return when he finishes what he needs to do. And Rose says that she will wait for him. His sister calls him and Shen approaches to say goodbye, saying that he will return soon. But she begins to cry due to feeling alone without him. She apologizes and speaks that she will be fine, as she will also try to recover in order to go to the capital. After that, Shen says goodbye, and when he opens the door, he finds knights aligned in formation to pay homage to the one who contributed the most to the cure of the lethargy disease. They say that they are going to be his escorts, and Captain Gatfall introduces himself, saying that it is an honor to accompany him. Rafina enters the carriage with him. Before the departure, his sister and his parents approach and reveal that that day is his 13th birthday, and they deliver a necklace so that he does not feel alone and always remembers them. They say that they chose that present together. Shin cannot hold back his tears. He puts on the necklace and thanks his family for the gift. Marie says that she is certain that with his magic, he will be able to save many people, but that if things become difficult, he must remember them, because they will always be with him. Shin thanks them crying and departs for the capital of the kingdom. Before that, he launches a sphere of light to his sister, and she does the same, while both lose themselves in the sky. And so the anime comes to an end. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. A kiss.